So this week we're going to talk about inequalities, inequities, so last week we talked about how to distribute resources under scarce conditions, and so we're not going to have that constraint for this week and next week. That doesn't mean our job is any easier. So we're going to talk about how to distribute resources, what distribution principle we should use that we think is the fairest of all, and then next after we discuss about inequities and inequalities and distributional systems, then next week we'll talk more about the concept of capabilities and human rights, because sometimes people like to use a human rights approach to distributing resources. Just as a reminder, so next week we have an assignment due, and I posted some readings, the usual readings, but I also posted an introduction that I would encourage you all to read. Sometimes the introduction, sometimes I don't know, gets passed over. Maybe not. So anyway, health inequities. What are they and how to address them, or which inequities we should address? So, having said that, so before we get into what we mean by an inequity, let's talk about inequalities in health. Okay, so here's takes a while to get started. All right, so here are some examples of certain groups experiencing certain inequalities in health. What do you think? Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. So, right? Any concerns about these inequalities? Yes, Jackie.
I don't really think there's so much of inequalities because they're not caused by stuff that we do. It's caused more of just a predisposition to a certain disease.
Okay, you're getting too far ahead of the game for me. I'm just asking a very simple question. Okay, are there do these represent inequalities between groups, different groups? Nikki?
Yeah, my understanding of inequality in this sense is in terms of like having medical research done or discriminating against them in the job place because they will be sick most of the time, which happened. Things in that line where they're not treated exactly the same as people who don't have the same disease because of the rareness of the condition. It's like people don't take it as public concern as much as they would if it's like high blood pressure or some other more common chronic diseases.
And so I'm trying to understand, your point is
that people with sickle cell, for instance, or these conditions, prostate cancer, breast cancer, cystic fibrosis, get treated differently, not as simple as people that don't have the same diseases.
So let's just take sickle cell anemia in African Americans. The fact that sickle cell is higher in African Americans than Caucasians, does that represent an inequality?
it's
Unequal. Yes.
it's just inequality in terms of the treatment, the way.
I'm not talking about treatment. I'm just talking about existence. I'm not talking about treatment.
Oh, okay. Existence, nobody can choose what they got, except to,
Well, in this case, right, with sickle cell, cystic fibrosis, breast cancer in women, what do you think about that? Well, I guess it depends on which groups you're comparing to. Luana?
I was just going to say it is an inequality because it's not distributed evenly amongst ethnicities for the sickle cell and the cystic fibrosis, and it's not distributed equally the breast cancer and the prostate between genders.
Right. Okay. Yeah. If we just looked at genders, right? If we just looked at between, there's a higher incidence of breast cancer in women than in men, right? Okay. Fact. Okay. I'm just starting off slow here. Okay. Just slow. Just trying to get some basic concepts down. Okay. I'm not asking a trick question. Not yet. Okay. Prostate cancer is higher in men than in women, right? Not a trick question. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. So these are examples of health inequalities. What about? Whoops. Oh, I thought I had that here. Okay. All right. So, and now there's, and then if we look at this slide, we have rates of premature birth, and we have stratified by different races, ethnic groups, right? So these are inequalities, right? Just say yes, okay? Just humor me, okay? Different obesity rates in women, stratified by different. Okay, great. Okay, you guys are just. You know how to make me happy. Okay. All right. Not too hard. Okay. So now, another question I want to ask. If we reduce the overall rates of disease in a population, will inequalities in health also lessen? Right. Not necessarily. And the answer is no. So reducing the difference in disease between groups is much different than reducing the overall rates. And though, we may, if we take a look at the aggregate of what has happened in the population, it may look like the population is healthier, but we may not have done anything to lessen the gap between the healthiest and the sickest. So if we're just measuring averages, well, the poor are getting poorer, but the rich are getting richer, and the aggregate remains the same, or maybe even increase, we haven't really done anything. But the utilitarian will say, we've done good, right? Because we've maximized the greatest number of individuals, if there's more rich than poor, or the total utility of happiness is greater. So the concept is don't look at the averages, because the more heterogeneous the population is, the more dangerous it is to use averages. And so we have a distributional indifference. So here, if we look at life expectancy, right, that great index of population health, right? So we see that the life expectancy has increased. If I had a line here for the whole population, it would be increasing, but we still have an inequality between the races. Same thing if we look at infant mortality rate, and the color here isn't. It's not too bad. So we have here we have all, and then we have white and black, and we see that we've done something to all the groups, to both groups, but there's still a gap. So So what are factors leading to inequalities? Why would there be inequalities in health between different groups? So now I'm beginning to ramp up the question here. Yeah.
Well, some of them you're just predisposed to because of your gender or your ethnicity. Some of them are a result of environment, living conditions. So I guess it varies.
Okay. Others? Fred?
Poverty.
Poverty? Okay. Yeah, Jennifer?
Access to health care.
Okay. All right.
Education.
Education? Okay. Good, good. The list continues.
Discrimination.
Discrimination. Okay. All right. And that leads to what?
Differences in treatment.
Okay. All right. There's your treatment. Okay. Finally. If you use that answer enough, that you're bound to get it appropriate. Right. Okay. Good job, Nikki. Persistence, fortitude pays off sometimes. Anyway, Chris.
Self-efficacy.
Self what?
Efficacy. Efficacy?
Efficacy?
Sorry.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right.
Tomato.
Okay. Right, yeah. When you just stick to a simple word like treatment. Okay. All right. All right. So, yeah, I mean, there's a whole list, right? Where's the list? Oh, there it is. So, we got the poverty. We got, we left out genetics. Okay. Got it. All right. Gender, we got individual choice, intelligence. Physical status, environmental, communication barriers, behaviors, access to health care. Up there's racism, discrimination, lack of control, cultural, political practices. Okay. For those who like pictures, there's a pictorial. And here we said someone determined a contribution to all these different factors.
How did they do that?
What's that?
How did they do that?
Yeah, good question. This guy Hogan. I don't know. That's a good question. Why don't we investigate that? They all seem to be. Geez, it's only 3%. I don't know. Well, it is estimated. Okay, if that helps. You've got to be careful of the word estimated. So, looking at that picture, okay, what screams out to you?
That 1/5 of what the problem is your own behavior.
Oh, okay, all right.
Poverty.
So we're in control 20% of the time.
Right.
Yep.
I didn't think it was that much, but go ahead.
I was going to say
Lena?
poverty is a huge chunk of the
Okay.
problem. It's a quarter
All right.
problem.
All right. Any other global concept that screams at you?
Environment isn't as big as I thought it would be.
15%?
Yeah, I thought
I'm surprised it's not greater, actually.
I thought it would be more.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Things that are like subject to change, the things that are preventable are the ones with the highest numbers. Like you can't change your genes, but they don't contribute that much.
You're right.
It's
So much for
actually
genetic determinism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you would think that would be higher if we succumb to all the hype, I guess. I mean, some more of a global statement that I mean, poverty, racism. This is contribution to health inequality. I'm one last chance. Earn a ticket to somewhere. Yes.
I guess the biggest ones are all social determinants of health. They're not
Yeah.
physical.
Right. Yeah. Look at healthcare, 10%. Right. And look at all the other contributions. Nothing to do with health care. So So unless that's just all pretty much obvious, but this is why. I mean, so when you think about it, you know, that's why I'm getting out of the doctoring business, because I realize I don't affect much what happens to my patients. Cassie, there's still time for you, okay? If you want to, yeah, right, jump ship, right? If I saw this slide years ago, I guess I'd still be here, but anyway. So I mean, we have the, so-called social determinants of health, and here we have all the medical stuff, okay? But then we have all this other stuff, okay? Lifestyles, environmental, social, economic, and social structure, and we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. Okay, so maybe this is all just a review. So there's two types of questions. I don't know why it's not. Two types of questions. One of more of a social scientific question, you know, what's the extent of inequalities and the factors that are causally responsible for these inequalities. So this is more of a descriptive type question. I mean, how do you describe the extent of the inequalities and the factors that may be responsible for them, right? It's just, I mean, that's what we just did. More of a descriptive exercise. But the other question, which is more normative, which inequalities should we care about? Or another way of saying that, which ones are unjust? To be a little bit more specific, we could decide which ones are unjust, and then we'll have a whole list. And then we could decide, well, which one of these unjust inequalities we should care about or do something about, because we may not be able to approach all the inequities. So having said that, so what is the difference between an inequality and an inequity? I mean, are they both the same word? Could we use it interchangeably? Or does an inequity mean something more? And yes?
I guess inequity kind of focuses more on the distribution of resources and I guess the processes behind it that drive to that inequality. And it has more of like a moral connotation and there's more judgment to it.
Well, why does it have a moral connotation to it?
Because you're focusing on like distribution of resources to different levels of people as far as like income.
Different levels of income?
Like income, class. You're looking at different distributions of, I guess, the distribution of wealth and resources. So it's
okay, well, I mean, the distribution of wealth, someone, a libertarian might say, well, if that's due to market forces, then that's okay, right? Some distribution of wealth is not unfair, right? Though some might be. So the issue is, and I think this is what you're saying, is that yes.
I think it was somewhere in their news where they described that not everything that's unequal is inequitable. The whole, like the kids with the different eye color, I think. like if they don't have equal distribution, but that doesn't necessarily mean that like inequity sort of implies a unfairness, whereas an inequality is just a difference in distribution.
Well, we're all talking about differences in distribution. Question is, which ones are unjust or unfair? So let's say the different distribution of breast cancer between men and women, right? There's an inequality, but not an inequity, right? I mean, it's biology, okay? Same thing with sickle cell, right? It's biology. Now, breast cancer in different groups of women, if there's differences in the incidence of breast cancer in different groups of women, then we might have an unfairness going on, in which case then we would use the word inequity. Inequality for sure, disparity, difference in rates. On the surface, no moral judgment to be ascribed to the inequality, but an inequity is an inequality that is unjust. The reason why you have the inequality is because there's an injustice going on. So getting back to this example, so again, as I said, sickle cell, the difference between African Americans and Caucasian is not unfair. Someone might want to use the word unfortunate, but not unfair. Even though the reason for the sickle cell was a evolutionary reaction to the environment. Yes.
Just a question. So if it's like sickle cell anemia in African American men, would that still be an inequality, or would that be considered a health inequity?
What do you mean by in men?
Like so like we know that if just looking at African Americans, that's considered like an inequality. But if we attach the fact that it's just African American men, is it still just considered an inequality, or would that be something for us to look at as a health inequity?
Well, but it's not just in men.
I'm just saying if it like hypothetical.
Well, let's look at more real world examples. As I said before, this is, I don't think this is an inequity. It's not unfair. Breast cancer in maybe between Caucasians and African American, that may be an unfair distribution. Prostate cancer in men, it's not unfair. And incidence of typhus in Polish peasants in 1848. Why am I picking on the Polish peasants in 1848? Right, yeah, right. I always thought of Virchow as, contributing to, hypercoagulable states. And Virchow's nose, I never thought he was a public health official, but he was a pathologist who went to investigate the incidence of typhus in the Polish peasants. And what did he find is the underlying reason why the peasants were getting typhus more than the wealthier people? What was the underlying cause? Yeah, Jennifer?
Poverty and poor health or poor social or living conditions.
Right, yes, and that was due to what other underlying factor?
It's like sanitation.
It was, yeah.
I thought it was lack of schooling.
What's that?
They had lack of schooling. They're being oppressed by.
Right, their social system was determined by some political process that left them, poor, with the land. So that's why he realized that medicine was or health was more controlled by social factors than medical factors, and he took up the cause and tried to become a politician. So one of the questions we have to ask is, why does a difference exist? Are there cases of inequalities due to genetic, biological differences? And these are not necessarily differences that are unjust, so they will not be health inequities. But there are a lot of inequities. There it is. That does capture a moral judgment, a justice issue, and inequities refers to avoidable unequal provision of resources which result from discriminatory or structural differences in social, political status, effects on gender, economic level, ethnicity, or cultural status. So emphasis on the word avoidable as opposed to genetic or biological. And our job is to find out when inequalities exist and whether the reason for those existence are due to avoidable, unequal provision of resources that results from discriminatory or systematic differences in social, political, economic policy. And hence our job is to, if they're avoidable, our job is to rectify the difference. And sometimes, according to Virchow, is that it takes a political process. And if it takes a political process, then we need to know actually more about political philosophy than ethics. So essentially, then, achieving equity is removing unjust differences between groups of people. Another way to say it is, it's the righting of the injustices represented by inequalities or poor health conditions among the disadvantaged, and equity is the absence of these systematic disparities. So an inequity, by definition, means it's an unfair inequality. So we're getting into the realm of social justice here. Well, let me just skip this. So the other concept is, should we be concerned? Here's another definition. Okay, those inequalities in health that are deemed to be unfair or stemming from some form of injustice. So what about the differences due to biological differences? Let's go back to that. Or genetic differences. Should we be concerned about those inequalities, even though they're not unfair? They're, as I said before, they're more unfortunate. Inequalities due to natural biological variation are unavoidable. Should we be concerned about that? Chris, have an opinion on that?
Yeah, not only we should be, but we are. I think the best example would be the Orphan Drug Act. and how the government took a particular interest in making sure that a small population of people who have small, very low rates of disease, people were pursuing, treatment modalities for these individuals. So I think we should be concerned, and the evidence is that we are.
Okay.
For the most part.
All right. Other examples where we...
There's probably some, but I can't think of them.
Okay, no, I wasn't looking at you. You gave an example, so you could rest.
Oh, excellent.
Yes, Nakeem. I know, treatment, right?
This is where my initial conversation comes in, like doing something to favor or to lessen the inequality among people who are genetically predisposed to, like, sickle cell. For instance, we're doing counseling just to educate people on what the actual cause is, because if there was nothing done, then we wouldn't even know how that comes about. Now people know what causes it and how they can avoid it. So I think we are doing something in that line. I'm sure.
Okay, all right. I mean, essentially, there's a lot of individuals born with, shall I say, biological deficits, handicap, and we expend a lot of social resources to try to get them up to speed, but obviously we're not going to produce equality, but we try to get people who are suffering from biological disadvantages, we try to get them up as much as we can to their full potential, right? So we even have a sense of treating or putting in extra resources to people in which the inequalities are unavoidable. And so there's that concept of helping the worst off. In other words, another question is, do undeserved disadvantages, do the bad luck raise issues of justice? And I think the short answer is well, you could maybe it may not raise issue of justice because it's not unjust, it's just unfortunate, though I guess one could determine whether not helping them would be an issue of justice. But I just wanted to get that out there. So why address inequities? Well, those inequalities are unfair. They affect everyone. How do they affect everyone?
The spillover effect.
From, like?
I think the violence and crime, infectious disease.
Well, how does the infectious disease, the inequalities, poor people who have increased rates of infections, then we're all exposed. Is that right? What's that? Yeah, right. So, or just those slides I showed a week ago or a few weeks ago where the inequalities in health affect us more. So, right, so if someone is in poor health and they may be more prone to crime or violence, and that affects all of us eventually. So it's this notion of population health, and also with the infectious disease, how well, I guess it might be saying the same thing. How and infectious disease spread might be conditioned on social issues, crowding and exposure factors like that. So we may and to take it a step further, what happens in the other part of the world could affect us as well, right? So the concept of thinking about our neighbors in faraway places could affect us as well, even though we may think we're immune to what's happening in the Middle East, Africa, or name your continent. And then eventually interventions could be cost effective if we reduce health inequalities. So the concept of an equity stratifier is that in order to understand what's happening, we have to have what's sometimes called, I think it's in the next slide, an equity lens. We could take data and look at the aggregate health, and like what I said in a few slides before, if you just look at aggregate health, you could say everything is okay, but then if you start drilling down onto the data and you look at the different health effects in different groups, and these are the groups that we usually look at, right? Different socio-economic groups, gender, ethnic groups, geographic location, and then other, age, disability, sexual orientation. I mean, you could, the list goes on and on where different groups may have different, will have unequal outcomes. So here's another example. Here we have infant mortality rate in South Africa, and we. So what conclusion could you state from this slide? Who?
Western
What's
cases.
that?
There's an inequality in the infant mortality.
Right. Okay. All right. And who has the highest?
Eastern Cape.
Okay. Very good. All right. Okay. All right. But and who has the lowest?
Western Cape.
Okay. All right. Very good. Now, if you look at urban versus rural, right? So now we may think we only have a problem in Eastern Cape, but there's something going on in Western Cape, and we have a problem in the rural area. So this is, you have to unpack the data in order to uncover these inequalities that may be due to an inequity fostered by, rural-urban conditions. So inequity lens is a way of looking things beyond the average numbers and comparing different relevant social groups. So list some inequalities that are not unfair or unjust. I think, we could, okay, so enough of that. So how do we address these inequities? Okay, I mean, we've used some heavy-duty words here: unjust, immoral, unfair, right? So it just begs for us to do something about them. So what should we do? Yes.
You can compare the distribution of resources between the disadvantaged and the more advantaged groups and see if there's a big difference.
Okay, and then what do we do?
I guess if there's a large difference, then maybe you could do something to raise the lower up a little bit.
Okay, all right. So now we're getting into how do we distribute? Right. What's our distribution policy? Okay, so right. So we see that one group has more needs than the other. So how do we distribute? That's just what do we focus on? And here's just another example about looking at the social determinants of health, and this is employment and mental health, and these are people with the steady jobs, and these are people with no job and temporary employment, and I think the case has been made, especially with that pie diagram, right? That a lot of the stuff is not going to be matters of healthcare, though healthcare is subject to a distribution policy. So the issue is that, however, if we just look at the distal cause, okay, this we find a new risk factor, and then we focus on the risk factor, the more at the level of physiology or biology, and then we try to change the level of health by looking at the distal cause. We do a study and we assess effectiveness, and we disappointing results, and so we go and look at another risk factor, as opposed to looking at the more proximal causes, the so-called social determinants of health, right? And so income, access to social resources, education, employment, right? However, I like to make a distinction between social determinants and so what's the, so we could, if the problem is income, right? So what's the solution? Or if the situation is education or employment, what's the solution?
I think the distribution of resources should not be affected by the education or the income.
Well, no. Let's say there is, the problem is income. The problem is, meaning poverty. The problem is education. The problem is employment. The problem is access to social resources. Yes.
Shouldn't the issue then be giving them the opportunity to make an income, or giving them the opportunity to receive some type of education? Because you can't just hand people money and say, okay, here you go.
Well, we could.
You could.
We could.
In the long run, will that be effective?
Well, okay, right, and that if I didn't put it on the list, but you could in terms of a final presentation, but one could talk about, is foreign aid good? Okay. Yes.
I think according to the difference principle, it won't be mattered if the people having high income or having high resources, they provide a maximum benefits to the worst of group, and trying to remove their suffering as much as that there is no unfairness left.
Well, the issue, and Siad was getting at it, we could give people money, we could give them property, and watch them lose it again, okay? We could give them a job, and watch them lose that again, okay? But we have to get at the cause of these causes. It's almost like treating the symptoms of an illness with, just treating the symptoms of the illness, but not treating the disease. And we haven't really done anything for the health of that person. So we want to look even deeper. So essentially, I want to make a distinction between the social determinants of health, which is, a big phrase we throw around these days, and look at the social processes underlying the unequal distribution. Because the same medical analogy, we want to treat the illness and not just the symptom. And so essentially, we want to get at the root causes and look at the determinants of these social determinants of health. So what do we have to look at? Again, it's something similar to, what Virchow understood. We have to look at the political, economic, and social forces. Essentially, despite improvements in health determinants, we could make a change in the health determinants, but then the social disparities will persist and come back to haunt us again. And so essentially, closing the gap, it's, in your reading, politics is nothing but medicine at a larger scale. Virchow thought that you really needed politics eventually if you want to treat the inequities that we experience. Not saying that's a cure-all because of no pun intended, but you could say that politics could get to be a nasty business. But you do want to address inequities of power, money, and economic resources. You want to look at gender equity, political empowerment. Before we get to that next slide, so I didn't put it on the PowerPoint here, but what's the I take it you're all familiar with the Human Development Indices?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. No? The HDI, Human Development.
Is it developed by the World Bank?
What's that?
Is it developed by the
The
World Bank?
World Bank. I don't know. Which entity puts it out, but human development. I'll talk more about it next week. But the short story is the Human Development Index consists of if there was a move in the 1990s to start comparing the state of development. What does that mean, development? Why do we call some countries developing and other countries developed? What's up with that? We've been using, right? We use that word a lot, right? We've read it. So what does that mean? Yes?
Honestly, I think it's more of infrastructure, economic, and institutional development a lot of times. I think when you definitely look at countries that are maybe not developed,
What do you look at? What issues?
Primarily, the economic aspect.
Okay. Okay, economic. All right, what else? What else would you look at?
Education.
All right. Okay, good. And I'll take, for now, one more.
Living standards.
Industry.
What, living standards?
Information technology. Health.
What, infrastructure? How do we measure that?
More information.
Okay, mortality. Wait, come on. I know I showed you that slide in which health was only 15%, but it's still important. So if
I'll get 5 points.
what's that?
I said health, so I get 5 points.
But you said enough to have. That will only take you out of the minus region for you. So I didn't tell you that I actually take points away for sometimes to what you say. So if not just you, Fred. In the 1990s, there was this concept of development of different countries, and one wanted to measure or compare the state of development between different countries, and so there was a move to figure out an index, the HDI, the Human Development Index. And guess what? They used these 3 indices. Okay, they used an index of wealth, gross national product. In fact, before the HDI, how did we measure differences between countries? It was just mainly looking at wealth between the countries. But that wasn't a good measure of development, because there's other stuff that goes in. And so they combined wealth with education index, and they looked at health index. And what's the, guess what was the index for health? No, not really. Well, no, not infant mortality. It was the average, I mean, the life expectancy, right? Okay. It's so they call this the HDI. Okay. So that's getting at the underlying. That was a first pass. Yes.
So in the HDI, do they look at like the inequalities in the country and terms of like the health education and?
Okay. All right. Good. Great. So, heard some noise there. No, they just looked at these 3, and in fact, they wanted to look at other issues, but they didn't want to overwhelm the world with more indices than these just 3. Who's that? I can't. Roller or Dahlia? What was that? Who's that? Oh, Roller, is that your niece? I can't hear you.
Two things. I have a few things to do. Secondly, I don't have internet yet at home.
What's that?
I think she's talking to someone there.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. It's no, truthfully, they didn't want to overwhelm the world with too many indices. They wanted something simple, but they wanted something more than just measuring wealth. But if you look at the history, I mean, if you now Google, and if you want to do it now, that's fine too. If you Google the HDI, human development, you will see that there are a host of indices that is now being measured, and so one actually measures the Gender Empowerment Index. And they look at shares of seats in Parliament, and they look at the differences in education levels, okay? And because, again, looking at the state of inequities in the country adds to the concept of human development for a country. And in fact, there's another index that's more of an equity index, looking at equities in education and health, and they threw out the wealth because they didn't think that you could have all the money in the world and still not be developed. So, you take a look at countries like Saudi Arabia, and they have a somewhat because of the wealth, the HDI just measured on these three obviously will be, not too bad. But if you look at the other indices, they do poorly, and one of the reasons is you look at their gender empowerment is very poor. So it's interesting to look at those numbers, but the concept is the trying to equate this concept of development, which we'll talk more next week, to a concept that extends beyond health. And is that still the job of public health, or now we're getting into what's the meaning of health, and what should be the job of public health? Is it just health, or is there more to living a life than just being healthy? Yes.
So I have a question that sort of like relates to this. So the Gini coefficient.
The what?
The Gini coefficient. The Gini.
Yes, right.
So that measures the inequality in the country. So do you know what they actually looked at to measure those inequalities?
To get at the gender inequity?
No, like in the Gini coefficient for like each country, I think that represents the level of inequality within the country.
Right,
so,
yes.
Like what do they look at? What are the factors that they use to measure that?
They looked at differences in education and health, and they also looked at the political process, shares in Parliament as well, to get a more robust concept of development in a country. But that's something we could look up, not now. So yeah, this was last year's result. So let's so this may be so looking at how you guys voted. Let me get to that. And the answer may be intuitive now, since we just.
I can take Carlos food.
All right, so justifications to address inequities. All right, so so most of you, 80% said claims of justice. No one said duties of beneficence, mutual benefit. So that just tells me that nobody is asking what's in it for me, right? And addressing the inequality can be cost effective. So actually, this group, this was a different way of presenting the data, but if you look at this carefully, last year's group was, I asked them to rank it, and high out on the list was claims of justice, and then we have, a lot of people thought that beneficence was claims of beneficence. So what's the, well, what about, in order to, the justification for addressing the inequity is on claims of justice rather than beneficence. Why didn't anybody put down beneficence? Yes.
We had to pick the best, and they got to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 for each of them.
I see. Okay, right.
Beneficence might have come in as second best.
Okay, right. So which style should I use for next year? Do you think a yes or no thing? Well, that's just you could respond privately if you want. So the issue is if we think it's just a duty of beneficence, meaning that we should do it because it's a good thing to do, versus a claim of justice, that has a stronger claim in the sense that we have to right a wrong, an injustice, and hence there's a sense more of an obligation than beneficence. If it was just a claim of beneficence, well, it's something that would be good to do, as opposed to if it's a claims of justice, it's something that we ought to do, that we're obligated to address. Yes.
Is it also along the same lines that you start getting into what is good? Is it a normative issue? If you're talking about justice, you're presuming that you've shown that there's an inequity, that you've demonstrated there's an inequity in something that needs to be addressed, whereas if it's for someone's benefit, aren't you presuming that it's for their benefit? You don't necessarily have anything definitive showing that there's an injustice or there's...
That's right. It's good to it's good to do it, but you don't have to. Now, there's another aspect to the difference, and so within our society, and also in the global society, is it something that again, it's something that would be good to do, but we're not under any obligation to do it if we don't want to do it, as opposed to if it's a claims of justice, then we're obligated to do it. Now that's on the giving side of things. Now on the receiving end, does it make a difference whether we're doing it because of a duty of beneficence or an obligation of justice? Like the person who's receiving the resources, does it make a difference to the person on the other end whether they're getting something because of beneficence or justice? Ed?
I think it depends on how that group or individual feels about perceived charity versus righting a wrong. I think some groups would be more receptive to some sort of intervention or action if it were to right a wrong versus, well, we're doing this for your own good type of measure.
Right, yeah, so it's on the receiving end, if if it's looked upon as just charity, then the person may feel they're getting a handout, and not that there's anything terribly wrong with a handout, but if they invoke a claim of justice, meaning that if they're perceived as being in that unequal situation because of an unjust society, they have not only a stronger claim, but they feel like they're not getting a handout. This is something that's owed to them. It's due to them. It's the reason why they're in that position is because of something we did to them. Okay, and hence it's not merely a handout, if that makes sense. So depending on how you analyze the situation depends a lot on whether one is obligated to do it, and on the receiving end, whether that person who's receiving the resources is receiving it only because of your kindness or because one is righting a wrong that occurred. So getting back to, so now if we believe that addressing the inequities involves principles of justice, the question is, what is justice? And that's what, getting back to how you answered that question. So we have, and I think you all know that there are different theories of justice. Okay, so here we had, you can't read that, neither could I, but anyway, so you had that case of the 3 children, right? And 1 flute, and they all feel like they want the flute. And Anne Anne feels that well, she knows how to play the flute the best. I think this is in your handout, right? And she would give the most happiness in the world if she owns the flute, right? Bob is very poor, has no toys of his own, and much less toys than the other children, and says, well, I should have the flute. Carla, who took many months to make the flute, says, well, I should keep it. And so you guys, 50% plus said Carla should have it. A quarter said Bob should have it, who's poor. And I guess 20% was in favor of Anne to play the good music. Okay, so what's going on here? This, I think, is a good question not to rank, right? We want real answers here. So what's why did you all choose a different distribution policy? Because that's what this is, right? A distribution principle. So let me just say there's no wrong answers here. So so.
Okay, for me, I think I chose Anne because I felt like she would get the most use out of it. I didn't choose Bob. Because it was kind of.
Should I have made this gender neutral? But go ahead. A, B, and C. I'm not implying anything. Go ahead.
But I didn't choose Bob because it was kind of the same thing of like you were talking about with the job. Like you can give him the job, but then he may not have it like 2 months down the road.
So you were concerned he might lose the flute?
Or just not put it to any use. And I felt like Anne, like she already knows how to play, so she doesn't have to give it to her. And she'd be able to utilize it more than anybody else.
Okay. All right. Jackie? Oh, yes?
That's a single command. If Anne want to take that flute, she should give something in return to Carla, since Carla had the hard work to do it. Is this what this says, or just she takes it for nothing?
Well, I'm trying to make this simple. I'm trying to keep it simple. I guess, though, having said that, I agree that would be an issue of fairness, mutual benefit. But what about Bob? Bob has nothing to give. By the way, who did you choose?
Me?
Yes, you.
I chose Carla because she did the work.
She did the work. Okay. All right. But what about Bob?
Sounds like the movie.
Yeah, okay. What about Bob? Why not Bob?
Because he has nothing to do with that flute.
Okay, true. Okay. All right. Jackie?
I picked Carla because I agree with Rolla that she did the work, she made it. I think it's up to her what she wants to do with it. If she wants to give it to Bob, I mean, that would be nice of her, but I think it should be her decision.
Okay. All right. Fred?
I chose Anne because I think.
You chose who?
Anne.
Anne?
Yeah.
Okay.
She has greater utility for the flute.
She what?
She has more like use for it, like.
Okay.
Utility for it than the rest.
All right, a few more. Jennifer?
I said Carla because if I spent months making a flute and someone took it away to give it to somebody else, I'd be pretty mad.
Okay, all right.
I chose Bob because it kind of shows that there's indication that Anne and Carla both have resources to. Carla has resources to make a flute, and then Anne, obviously, she had lessons or access to a flute before. So Bob has nothing, but he needs lessons as well. So.
Does it make a difference if he knows how to play it or not?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
You'll see what he does with it when he gets it. But
Right.
That's why I chose Bob.
Jessica?
I mean, I said Carla. Carla could be a factory worker for all we know. I think that she should enjoy the fruits of her labor.
Right. Okay. All right. Like a good Marxist. Thank you very much. Giving it to Anne is emblematic of what type of distribution principle? Utilitarian. And giving it to Bob would be
Democratic.
Well, not voting here.
Egalitarian.
More egalitarian, and Carla would be
Libertarian.
What's that? Libertarian, right. Yeah, the marketplace, right. Now, I do have, a hunch, maybe I'm wrong, that if Bob's situation was due to unjust circumstances, I'm almost afraid to ask, because of the preponderance for Carla, but would Bob have a claim? Yes.
I think as you set it up, it's more of a charitable beneficence claim. But if it's an inequality or inequity due to justice, I think there's a stronger claim, as we said before, and that I mentioned before. The claim is stronger when it's a justice claim.
Right, yeah, right. So exactly. So those who wanted to give it to Bob, right, it's more of a beneficence. But if I set up the question as a justice claim, then hopefully more would give it to Bob. And so, all right. So essentially, we have, right, the three different distribution. Policies.
Professor?
Yes. Go ahead. Dahlia?
Yes, hi. Actually, I just want to ask whether this is not the use of the proper use of what you give So, for example, if you just mentioned that if you look at it from the point of justice, that many people would choose Bob, but I think I would still not choose Bob if I don't see that he will be using it properly, because then it's unjust for others who might put the food to better use. Does that make any sense, considering justice of resource allocation?
Well, it makes sense, depending on, I guess, what kind of utility principle you're using. If you only want to give it to somebody who could know how to play it, that's one consideration. The other consideration is I'm sure Bob would get a lot of pleasure just having it, and even though he can't play it well, but he would have a lot of pleasure. Whereas Anne would provide a lot of happiness to other people. So if you believe in the happiness principle, then give it to Anne. If you believe in the pleasure principle, then you might want to give it to Bob. That's where the utilitarians, it all depends on what's your measure of utility. Depends on to whom you give it to. So we have different theories of justice. So which one should we use? This again is a political process, and as we debate the budget, concerning Medicare and Social Security, which is more looking at a economic egalitarian versus a marketplace type of justification. Again, several theories of justice. They all try to explain what would make a distribution just. And let me run through these slides. I think by now we all know the difference. One word about egalitarian is that someone wrote a book, Equality of What? What are we looking at? What measure of equality? Most of the times, we're not looking at strict equality, but mainly equality of opportunities. I think, you said the opportunity. Everyone should have the same opportunity to achieve something. Everyone could have liberty, but if you don't have the opportunity to exert your liberty, then what's the point? So, having said all this, when we look at different theories of justice, we're sometimes looking at some type of distributional equality versus aggregate enhancement, which may be more utilitarian. And the other way to look at these different theories of justice, one could look at the arrangement view of justice. What are the institutional arrangements? But that's not looking at what kind of society emerges from that institutional arrangement. And so, in contrast, we have a social realization focus view of justice. And we'll talk more about these differences, actually, when we talk about the differences between essentially, capabilities and rights and other focuses of justice. But what I want to focus on, only because this has been dominant theory in the last few decades is John Rawls' theory of justice. Justice as fairness, and he concentrated on social institutions, more of a contract theory. Justice is the first virtue of social institutions. Therefore, in the just society, the liberties of equal citizenship are taken as settled, and the rights secured by justice are not subject to political bargaining. And so he ventured out to try to understand what would be the principles of that would be justice as fairness. So he's looking at more of a combination of a procedure and a distribution of resources. And he had this idea of in order to make a distribution fair, or how to distribute, he thought that the only way to really get at it is to do this thought experiment where everyone was in this so-called original position, or he called it a veil of ignorance. So if you took a lot of people and you ask them what distribution principle you would want, okay, if people like own a lot of property, they would, be focused on, on the marketplace. If somebody was had a disadvantage due to other aspects, minority groups, they might choose a different distribution policy. So he thought that if you took people who didn't know what position they would be in the world, okay, their social, political, economic position, what their talents would be and abilities, what, how intelligent they would be, and what their conception of the good would be, he thought this would be the fairest way to think what people would choose, what distribution policy would be chosen. And he came up with these principles. He thought that first and foremost, people would want to have an equal set of basic liberties. The civil, political rights, liberties, first and foremost. I think that sounds reasonable. And then, now, John Rawls, he was a qualified egalitarian. He thought that there would be social and economic inequalities. One major thought would be that, well, if everybody knew that everyone would always be equal, then there would be no incentive to do more, right? It would be hard to have a system based on merit if you didn't allow for some fair inequalities. Okay, so so essentially, if, however, you have an equal set of basic liberties for everybody, and if the social and economic inequalities satisfy two conditions. The first one, they must be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. So, in other words, everybody would have a fair chance to get a job, attain a certain political, social position. In other words, there would not be any discrimination. So now we're talking about, we're not talking about unjust inequalities. If someone worked harder than somebody else, so be it, right? They deserve more money, no problem. Okay, so with an equal system of liberties and fair equality opportunities, then it's okay to have social and economic inequalities. No problem with that. And then he also said that, well, however, there is this concept of the worst off. And so any system of inequalities has to be to the greatest benefit of the least advantage. And so if, and this is the difference principle or the equity principle. So essentially, that principle, so if you had, if you had a system of strict equality, and that maximized the absolute principle of the least advantage, then so be it. But if it's possible to raise the position of the least advantage further by having some kind of system of inequality of income and wealth, then the so-called difference principle would say, allow that to happen. So essentially, if you had some kind of economic marketplace system which it winds up producing inequalities, but it also raises the level of the least advantage to a position more than any other policy, then go for it, if that makes sense. So even if you had a system that produced equality in the distribution, but you could get more bang for your buck for the least advantage by having a policy that produced inequalities, again, you would go for that. Essentially, you're doing what's best for the least advantage. So so what do you think of that? What do you think? If we follow those principles, everything would be great? Yes.
Damn, I'll come back to you. So.
What's that?
Say, come back to me.
Okay, all right. You don't mind if we forget to come back to you.
How is that different from utilitarian?
Well, because utilitarian would just look at the right, and even if it means sacrificing some liberties for the minorities. Now, utilitarians don't care about. Well, I shouldn't be.
It doesn't
any utilitarians in this room?
This targets the least advantaged.
That's right.
Does not necessarily.
Because if you could raise aggregate health, that's the major thing, okay? And then the libertarians, right, would, well, again, they're just looking at the marketplace mechanisms. People should have their own freedom to do what they want. But the question for the libertarians is, are there marketplace imperfections? And the libertarians have too much faith in the marketplace to the point where, well, it's the marketplace, so we shouldn't be concerned about imperfections because it's the marketplace. Yeah.
What do you mean by imperfections, like unequal opportunities or?
Yes, right, yeah, right. And egalitarians want to address the imperfections in the marketplace by, I mean, what could I say? The Obama gets a lot of whatever havoc for wanting redistribution of wealth. He's called the socialist, but essentially, I mean, that's what we do anyway. But I guess, I don't know, people don't want to admit to that. But he wants to take it to, he and his other Democrats want to take it to another level. But anyway, so, but, however, now, when you think about it, this theory is looking at the distribution of resources, right? How we distribute social and economic inequalities. And so the oh, right, and so he looks at the so what are we distributing here? He has this theory of the primary goods: rights, liberties, opportunities, income and wealth, and the social basis of self-respect. And so he's looking at, and then this guy Norm Daniels came by and said, well, you also want to add health to the mix as well. So the problem is, and again, this is where the capabilities come in, that we'll talk more about next week, is that it's not concerned. This is just looking at the resources. There's nothing said about the realization of human well-being. There's nothing said about the ability of people to use these resources or the capabilities to use these resources, and what are the constraints there. And so he was just concerned about how society distributes certain primary goods to satisfy competing conceptions of the good, meaning that everybody has different conceptions of the good. And so everyone should have all these resources, and then everyone should be able to use it. But his theory and a lot of other theories of justice are not concerned whether somebody is able to use the resources. So, like an example, you have this, people who are disabled. So, so someone had the idea a long time ago to build wheelchairs, right? They needed the resources, okay? And so did that solve the problem? So could people get from A to B without any problem?
No.
What's that?
No.
And why is that?
Wheelchairs need ramps.
Yes, right, that's right. So, so it wasn't only about, 10, 15 years ago, probably less than that, that cities started to change the sidewalks. Not only the ramps, but but buses, ramps, but sidewalks, right? To be able to get from A to B. So even though the handicap had the resources, they weren't able to use it. I mean, to a certain extent. But now we're doing a better job in making sure that people are able to use the resources. So that would be one example of how you could have the primary goods, but the issue and the issue is what matters, and this is Amartya Sen's concept of development as freedom. What matters is what people can actually do with the primary goods, the capability to achieve valuable functionings, okay? And so his concept was looking at development, and development concerns with what one could do with those resources, and he was looking at certain issues involving freedom. So when we look at social justice, I mean, we're looking at how institutions social institutions are arranged, but we the other step in the direction is how well are people able to exercise their capabilities to achieve a concept of the good, also to be able to have a choice in what conception of the good. And so we're looking at human well-being. And human well-being, something I was getting at a few minutes earlier, we're not just looking at health, we're looking at human well-being, which is something that is more than just health. I mean, health is intrinsic and also instrumental to achieving well-being, but there's other stuff that goes into achieving well-being. And why don't we think about it in the next week? But what other things? Just to get us. What determines well-being? Whether health is one. What else would go into the equation?
Interpersonal relationships.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah.
Their own perception of their well-being.
Well, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
I guess freedom to do as you please, to go as you please, not be restricted.
Okay. All right. What's that?
Freedom.
Yeah. Right. And another one is respect. And there's a few others. So the other thought is to ensure that individuals have capabilities is an important task for public health. Is this being too encompassing for public health? Or should public health just be concerned with health? I'm not looking for a right answer, okay? But I mean, it's a question to ask. Is this too much to take on? Yeah.
Well, they broaden the definition of health beyond physical to the physical, mental, and emotional.
Right.
I think that was the World Health Organization, the definition that.
Right, back in 1948,
yeah.
Right.
And interpersonal connectivity and liberty all tie into emotional and social health.
Right. Well, I mean, again, looking back at that pie diagram, health is just one part of the picture. And I think if you look at all the issues that you guys have been bringing up on the discussion forum, it certainly transcends just issues about health. Is that fair to say? Or I think so. Now, I guess it is a question to ask whether 100 years ago we were just looking at sanitation and the water supply and infectious disease. Jessica?
Probably would say a lot of things in health and self-efficacy.
Self what?
Self-efficacy. So that can be viewed as another thing.
Self-efficacy? What do you mean by that?
The ability or the capability of an individual to make conscious decisions or perceive that they can do some type of health behavior. So that ties into capability.
Right, concerning health, but the larger concept, if you're looking at a concept of development, I was that one piece of chalk. Oh, here it is. Okay. We're down to the end of our budget. Is to be able for people to just simply to do and to be. I mean, that's a very encompassing definition of well-being, not just health. So the right, yeah. So the job of justice, securing a sufficient level of each dimension for each individual insofar as possible. So these individual powers and Faden, that concept of well-being was included health, personal security, reasoning, respect, attachment, which was relational, and self-determination. And so public health policies should look at these, not indices, but aspects of well-being. And they were saying that their theory of justice, Powers and Faden, they weren't focusing on distributional principles. They call their theory of justice non-ideal because they were concerned about getting the distributional principles right and leading to a certain outcome. And hence, they took it the other way around. They wanted to look at an outcome, which is well-being, and then determine whether a system was just. Whether those distribution principles were doing its job. They wanted to look at these aspects of well-being because they couldn't think which distributional principles would lead to people having capabilities. So now, with that in mind, we'll dispense with this in just a few minutes, I think. The question is that if you want to now look at an outcome theory or outcome basis for justice, we may want to get into the targeting business for public health, because one concern about public health practices is that it could cause, and we discussed about this at various times in the last few weeks, that some public health policies could widen inequalities, right? Public health practices in it of itself could be inequitable. So like smoking ban in public places, would that increase the gap or decrease the gap between certain groups of people? There's a smoking ban in public places. Who would affect that more? The well-to-do, the less-to-do? What do you think? Well, yes.
I think it affect everyone almost equally since they are all subjects to the same group.
Okay, all right. Well, thinking about that, what about information-based policies? Nutrition labeling, anti-smoking ads, drink driving campaigns? What's that? Decrease the gap? Increase the gap? Why would it increase the gap? Why would it increase the gap? I just said that. Yes?
I think the people who you are probably more interested in having that effect aren't really going to be the ones who are receiving that message. So the people who are more health conscious are going to be taking that information in and using it more. So you're going to see the effect is not going to work on the group who you're interested in targeting with that information. So you're going to see an increase in the gap.
Right, because the I mean, I don't know. It's I don't know if they ever did a study on who reads the labels, but I think people who are more focused on the health or have time to worry about their health will be reading the labels, as opposed to people who are more worried about, getting any meal, right, and couldn't care less what the label said. Yes.
And I think if you think of the issues of literacy and just education and like learning to read labels and stuff like that, it could also cause an increase.
Right. So initially the concern is right. So the concern is that let me look at that. So some policies initially, okay, there's let's say if you have a universal policy like nutritional labels, okay, and you see the effect on the wealthy and the poor, you'll see there's a lot of policy has more an effect on the wealthy, and the poor will have an effect too, but that levels off. But then if you add an additional policy that targets the poor as well, then maybe you'll have the poor getting up to this level as well. Also, there's a concept that if you have a universal policy, it first affects the wealthy, and then it finally gets to the poorer people. The concern is that sometimes you stop your policy at this level. See, this is time. You run out of funds, and you still haven't decreased the gap, which goes into the issue of should we be in a targeting business in our distribution policy, and I think let's I don't know if this let me just so if had a question on targeting, I've already let's see if right. So if is this in which situations would targeting an intervention to specified groups be justified? And so intervention only protects those who receive it. Disease or situation has a patchy distribution. That would be, well, I don't know if you could read these things, but going back to this was well, under certain situations there would be situations in which you would want to have a targeting policy. So individuals in need are easy to identify. A targeting policy might work there. There's a spontaneous demand for the intervention is low. Well, there a targeting policy actually might work. A disease has a patchy distribution. A targeting policy would work. High-risk groups are hard to identify. Well, a targeting policy would not work in that situation. Right. So this is this slide shows where a targeting policy might be worthwhile. Here, a targeting policy would not be worthwhile. Here, you would want to have universal coverage. And I know we talked a lot before about I mean, the downside of a targeting policy would be the concern with stigma to be sure. But in some cases, in order to address inequities, well, you may need to have a targeting policy in which you just you're targeting. Again, the concept is that you want to address the social determinants of health, and so you could address the determinants, but then again you also want to address the processes, in which case you may want to get drill down to a certain level to affect what's causing the inequities. So and sometimes the only way to do that is to have a targeting policy. But in certain situations, a targeting policy would work. In other situations, you may want to have a universal coverage. So, like for example, if you go into a neighborhood for vaccination, you wouldn't just vaccinate the poorer children, right? I mean, you would get the the rich kids as well. But if you had to choose a neighborhood, and I'm not, vaccination may not be a good choice, but if you had to choose a neighborhood, you may target a poorer neighborhood in order to get the poorer people up to speed. But again, if you have a universal policy, you may not reach the poor, in which case a universal policy may be fair. You don't want to cut the rich off, but you may have to do something extra to get the poor up to speed. So all these different concepts on how we redistribute the resources. So next week we'll the assignment deals with how actually to get a certain group up to speed, and the issue is what kind of policies work. So we'll talk about that next time. Okay. All right. Good. Have a good weekend.
I've learned.
Yeah, it's like her face around like.
Are you going straight to class or?